Hi everyone, welcome back to KG Graves. In September 2022, we went to Newent Cemetery in Gloucestershire to visit the grave of the record producer Joe Meek. He looked after artists like Hines, John Layton and the Honeycombs. Unfortunately, he killed his housekeeper and then killed himself. More information about that coming up shortly, but as usual, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You know what to do by now, but please do subscribe.
Joe Meek now produces recording tapes only, leaving the big record companies to make and distribute his records. But even here, he has his problems.
Again, I met with a lot of difficulties because I kept coming up with hits, and the A&R men and different people tied to these major companies were inclined to be a little bit envious and complained about the plugs my records were getting. And so I have to watch these people like a hawk.
In a letter to a colleague, Meek wrote, "No one should be left in the office alone, even if you think they can be completely trusted or are friends of mine. It's important also that no one is allowed in the control room or studio without Dennis or Michael around. Always check with me if it could be safe to leave them there to rehearse, wait, or hang around. Always keep bottom door locked unless I say otherwise."
Joe Meek was born Robert George Meek on the 5th of April 1929 in Newent, Gloucestershire, to parents Alfred and Evelyn, née Burt. He was an English record producer, sound engineer and songwriter who pioneered space age and experimental pop music. He developed an interest in electronics at a very early age, filling his parents' garden shed with begged and borrowed electronic components, building circuits, radios, and what is to believe the region's first working television. During his national service in the Royal Air Force, he worked as a radar technician, which increased his interest in electronics and outer space. From 1953, he worked for the Midlands Electricity Board. He used the resources of the company to develop his interests in electronics and music production, including acquiring a disc cutter and producing his first record. He left the Electricity Board to work as an audio engineer for a leading independent radio production company, which made programs for Radio Luxembourg, and made his breakthrough with his work on Ivy Benson's Music for Lonely Lovers. His technical ingenuity was first shown on the Humphrey Lyttelton jazz single Bad Penny Blues, when, contrary to Lyttelton's wishes, Joe modified the sound of the piano. The record became a hit. He then put enormous effort into building Dennis Preston's Lansdowne studio, but tensions between them soon saw Joe leaving. He recorded US actor George Chakiris for Saga Records, and it was this that led him to Major Wilfred Alonzo Banks and an independent career. He also engineered many jazz and calypso records, including vocalist and percussionist Frank Holder and bandleader Kenny Graham. Joe was also working as a songwriter at this time, using the name Robert Duke. After being initially released by Eddie Silver and later by Tommy Steele, the Duke composition Put a Ring on My Finger was recorded by Les Paul and Mary Ford in 1958 and reached number 32 on the US charts. In January 1960, together with William Barrington Coupe, he founded Triumph Records. At the time, Barrington Coupe was working at Saga Records in Empire Yard, Holloway Road for Major Wilfred Alonzo Banks, and it was the Major who provided the finance. The label very nearly had a #1 hit with Joe's production of Angela Jones by Michael Cox. As an independent label, Triumph was dependent on small pressing plants which were unable to meet the demands for product. The record made a respectable appearance in the top 10, but it demonstrated that Joe needed the distribution network of the major companies for his records to reach retail outlets. Its independent business results and Joe's temperament eventually led to the label's demise. He later licensed many Triumph's recordings to labels such as Top Rank and Pi. That year, Joe conceived, wrote and produced an out-of-space music fantasy album titled I Hear a New World, with a band called Rod Freeman and the Blue Men. The album was shelved for decades, apart from the release of some EP tracks taken from it. Joe went on to set up his own production company, known as RGM Sound Limited, later Meeksville Sound Limited, with toy importer Major William Alonzo Banks as his financial backer. He operated from his home studio, which he constructed at 304 Holloway Road, Islington, a 3-floor flat above a leather goods store. His first hit from Holloway Road reached #1 in the UK singles chart, John Layton's Johnny Remember Me 1961. This Death Ditty was cleverly promoted by Layton's manager, expatriate Australian entrepreneur Robert Stigwood. Stigwood was able to gain Layton a booking to perform the song several times in an episode of Harper's West 1, a short-lived ITV soap opera in which he was making a guest appearance. The instrumental, Telstar, by the Tornadoes, written and produced by Joe, was recorded at the Holloway Road Studios in July 1962. It was released in August 1962 and reached #1 in the UK and on the US Billboard's Hot 100 in December. Joe's third UK #1 and last major success was the Honeycombs' Have I the Right in 1964. It also became a #5 hit on the American Billboard pop charts. The success of these recordings was instrumental in establishing Stigwood and Joe as two of Britain's first independent record producers. When his landlady, Violet Shenton, who lived downstairs, felt that the noise was too much, she would bang on the ceiling with a broom. Joe would signal his contempt by placing loudspeakers in the stairwell and turning up the volume. A privately manufactured black plaque, designed to resemble the official blue plaques, has since been placed at the location of the studio to commemorate Joe's life and work. Joe became fascinated with the idea of communicating with the dead. After reading the works about EVP, electronic voice phenomena, of Friedrich Jurgensen and Konstantin's Raudive, he would set up tape machines in graveyards in an attempt to record voices from beyond the grave. In one instance, capturing the meows of a cat he believed was speaking in human tones, asking for help. In particular, he was obsessed with Buddy Holly, saying the late American rocker had communicated with him in dreams. By the end of his career, Joe's fascination with these topics had taken over his life following the deterioration in his mental health, and he started to believe that his flat contained poltergeists, that aliens were substituting his speech by controlling his mind, and that photographs in the studio were trying to communicate with him. Joe was affected by bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and upon receiving an apparently innocent phone call from American record producer Phil Spector, he immediately accused Spector of stealing his ideas before hanging up angrily. His professional effects were often hindered by his paranoia. He was convinced that Decca Records would put hidden microphones behind his wallpaper to steal his ideas. Depression and extreme mood swings. In later years, Joe started experiencing psychotic delusions, culminating in his refusal to use the studio telephone for important communications due to his belief that his landlady was eavesdropping on his calls through the chimney, that he could control the minds of others with his recording equipment, and that he could monitor his acts while away from the studio through supernatural means. Joe was also a frequent recreational drug user, with his barbiturate abuse further worsening his depressive episodes. In addition, his heavy consumption of amphetamines caused him to fly into volatile rages with little or no provocation, at one point leading him to hold a gun to the head of drummer Mitch Mitchell to inspire a high-quality performance. Joe's homosexuality, at a time when homosexual acts were illegal in the UK, put him under further pressure, and he was particularly afraid that his mother would find out about his sexual orientation. In 1963, he was convicted and fined £15 for importuning for immoral purposes, also known as cottaging, in a London public toilet, and was consequently subject to blackmail. In January 1967, police in Tattingstone, Suffolk, discovered 2 suitcases containing the remains of Bernard Oliver. According to some accounts, Joe was afraid of being questioned by the Metropolitan Police, as it was known that they were intending to interview all of the gay men in London. This was enough for him to lose his self-control. Joe always walked everywhere outside the studio wearing sunglasses, fearing recognition by local gangsters such as the Cray twins, whom he feared would attempt to steal his acts or blackmail him regarding his homosexuality. Joe's depression deepened as his financial position became increasingly desperate. French composer Jean Ledrout accused him of plagiarism, claiming that the melody of Telstar had been copied from Le Marché d'Austerlitz, a piece from a score Ledrout had written for the film Austerlitz 1960. The lawsuit meant that Joe did not receive royalties from the record during his lifetime, and the issue was not resolved in his favour until 3 weeks after his death in 1967. On the 3rd of February 1967, the 8th anniversary of Buddy Holly's death, Joe killed his landlady, Violet Shenton, and then himself at his Holloway Road residence. He was 37 years old. The weapon used was a single-barrelled shotgun, which he had confiscated from his protégé, former Tornadoes bassist Heinz Burt. Joe and his landlady had argued over his noise levels and the rent that he still owed, before Joe picked up the shotgun. Burt had informed Joe that he had used the gun to shoot birds while on tour, at which point Joe had taken it. Joe had kept the gun under his bed, along with some cartridges. As the gun owner, Burt was questioned intensively by police before being eliminated from their inquiries. After Joe's suicide, Cliff Cooper of the Millionaires is said to have purchased the thousands of recordings he had hidden in his studio for £300. These recordings were called the tea chest tapes among fans, as they had been stored in tea chests in Joe's flat. Alan Blackburn, former president of the Joe Meek Appreciation Society, catalogued all of them in the mid-1980s, but they remained unreleased. They contained over 4,000 hours of music on approximately 1,850 tapes, including recordings by David Bowie as a singer and sax player with the Conrads, Gene Vincent, Denny Lane, Billy Fiore, Tom Jones, Jimmy Page, Mike Berry, John Layton, Richie Blackmore, Jess Conrad, Mitch Mitchell and Screaming Lord Sutch. The tapes also contained many examples of Joe composing songs and experimental sound techniques. Tape 418 has Joe composing songs for the film Live It Up. On the 2nd of September 2020, Cherry Red Records announced that they had purchased the tapes from Cooper and will begin the process of digitising the archive with a view to releasing the material, subject to rights clearance. The first release was The Telstar Story in 2022, and the series has since run to a dozen volumes. In 1963, Joe worked with a then little-known singer, Tom Jones, then the lead vocalist of Tommy Scott and the Senators. He recorded 7 tracks with Jones and took them to various labels in an attempt to get a record deal, with no success. 2 years later, after Jones's worldwide hit It's Not Unusual in 1965, Joe was able to sell the tapes that he had recorded with Jones to Tower Records in the USA and Columbia Records in the UK. Here is a list of some of the many artists Joe produced. Altogether, he produced 22 chart singles, which all appeared in the top 50. Joe was a genius in his work of producing out-of-worldly sounds and music, but again, another person with problems, probably due in part to drugs. The standout track for me was always Telstar, which for the time of its releasing was just amazing. Let's see where his grave is located. While visiting the cemetery, we bumped into some of Joe's relatives who were cleaning the grave. This unfortunately left it quite damp and dark to video, but there's some pictures to follow which were took earlier. So, there you have it, the grave of Joe Meek, English record producer, sound engineer and songwriter. As usual, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and thanks if you've already subscribed, I really do appreciate it. See you on the next one.